something happens when you're recording a podcast with amazing people all the time. Like before you really get going, usually there's some conversation, some chit chat, and before you say, okay, now let's record and go on. And the same thing happens afterwards. Like you have these really engaging, interesting, revealing conversations. And today I'm going to be talking with Kate Balestreri. But like the interesting stuff, well, it sort of started the second we opened up the program. So I'm not going to do the normal intro that you usually get on a show. We're going to sort of drop you in what feels like the middle and go from there. We can just have the pre-talk now and then get into it later.
Perfect.
But yeah, this whole Huberman thing is I don't know why I'm so like stuck in it. Like I don't know why this has happened, but like I
Mm.
feel like I just have to talk about it a lot for better or worse.
Well, I mean, it is something to talk about, so I'm not surprised. And if I remember right, you were in the article, right? You were,
I was one of the one of the only on the record sources who knew him,
yes.
uh, and yeah, it was a little it's a little strange because I've been speaking to all of the women who were involved on
Hmm.
the background, but they all didn't want to have like take all the internet hate. Go
Hmm.
figure.
Yeah.
Uh, and I was like, whatever, I got enough internet hate, I can deal with this, and I have.
I believe it. What's been the most egregious form of hate that you've received so far?
I had a couple people threatening to like hang me and stuff like that, but like how real is that is a question. Like, it's the
Mhm.
internet. It's like it's like all these people's id
Mhm.
coming out, and I don't feel like they're credible
Yeah.
threats. I've had credible threats before, and this didn't quite
Mhm.
feel like that. But it's like just the constant like drone,
Mhm.
and I make the error of like coming on early in the morning and like checking my like the messages, and I'm like, oh no, my morning is like everyone hates me.
Yeah, those days are hard.
Uh,
Mm.
and yeah, you're on the internet. Yeah, I'm sure people hate you too.
They do. And men have a really interesting and very predictable arc. It's very quickly you're ugly and then you're stupid. And when you have a degree, you have a bullshit degree. It's not worth anything. When
Hmm.
you have a business, they threaten to attack your business. Then they
Hmm.
threaten to rape you. And then they threaten to dox you. Sometimes they do dox you. And then they threaten to kill you. It's a very predictable.
Is that like the stages of grief? Like you start here and then you end
See.
up in murder threats?
That might be one stage of grief. I think it's the anger stage.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, have we started the interview? Are we just doing it? Are we just here right
I,
now talking already?
I think so. I think we can get started. I think that's a great entry, right, into this conversation, the stages of hate.
Guys, all right. So now we're doing the intro to this podcast, and we just had some pre-conversation. I'm talking to Kate Balestreri. Is that how I pronounce your name? Kate
Yes,
Balestreri?
that's great. Yeah.
She's a sex positive therapist who focuses on providing counseling services to help people build resilience and recovery. And she has a thriving sex and couples therapy program
Practice.
and clinics all across America. And we we connected over the it's really interesting to be in this particular moment in history because we
Mhm.
connected because there's this infidelity is in the news right now, especially around Andrew Huberman, and Threads is incredibly active, and Twitter's incredibly, or X, whatever it is, incredibly active, and I think a lot of people they have a lot of opinions, and they
Mhm.
have a lot of rage, and they're confused about what truth is. I think everyone's confused about what truth is on the internet
Mhm.
now, and so we're going to talk about these things, and I think you know you were just talking about how men in particular are sending you a lot of hate, and you're not even talking about the stuff that I'm talking about. You're talking about other things in the world, and and let's just start here. It wasn't even on my question list, but
Mhm.
like, why is it that that there is just so much boiling over rage
Mm.
in the world, and why is it being expressed on the internet, and what does that rage actually mean in terms of like real action?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to be reductionistic about it, I think a big part of the rage that we see in every social media platform is competition for resources, right? At the end of the day. And when I say competition for resources, I do mean material resources, but I also mean relational resources. People want to belong and people want to feel lovable and worthy, because feeling lovable and worthy means that we have a higher risk of survival, right? When we are worthy, people worthy of being in a group, that
Mm,
group takes care of us. And so
mm,
there is this very primitive, I think, relationship with the perception of scarcity of resources. And
mm,
right now, we live in an economy that resources are pretty scarce because of all the
mhm,
disparities in wealth hoarding and all the things that are happening. um, so I think that people are angry. And when they get angry about that, they start to project their hate into other groups, right? There's a lot of in group, out group jockeying for power, jockeying for resources, jockeying for confidence that we matter. And when people have opinions that really bump up against the values of one group or one identity, it's easier psychologically to just sort of annihilate in your mind this other group and
mhm,
determine that they are wrong or bad or stupid or awful and should be gone from your
mhm,
purview and gone from the earth, maybe is the fantasy.
mhm,
um so I think it's a lot of just like I'll say projective catharsis, right? If I deem that you are terrible, you are wrong,
mhm,
you are stupid, I don't have to look at the parts of me that are getting activated, and I don't have to
mm.
look at what's going on in the world that I might not want to have to contend with. Because that's really scary. A lot of people feel pretty powerless, and we don't like to feel powerless. So we
Mhm.
contradict that by feeling powerful, by blowing our rage all over the internet.
Yeah, and then they like literally will threaten. They will actually, and so in your case,
Mhm.
they you say that they've not only said things like they wanted to rape you and they wanted to, you're ugly
Mhm.
and you're, you say you started ugly and you got to rape and then it ends up in murder. Like there's this
Mhm.
arc that appears, and it's interesting, on the comments on my stuff. It's this, I find this fascinating, is
Mhm.
that a lot of people, because I've came out saying that Huberman has some real issues. A lot of people call me, say like I'm a woman scorned, like you sound like one of his ex-girlfriends. You're a, and I find that I find that so fascinating,
Mhm.
because I'm a man,
Mhm.
right, and the worst insult you can do to somebody who comes out and tries to tell her is call a man a woman,
Right.
and it sort of shows this. I mean, I always knew there was sexism in the world. Like, I mean, come on,
Mhm.
I'm not an idiot. Like, it's obvious it's there, but it's interesting to see how much hate.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess the privilege of being a man is that I don't have to like deal with all of the hate all the time, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then and just seeing it come over and seeing the feminization, because they don't want to accept that a man could be upset about something. You have to like change them
Yeah.
metaphorically. And then it's like a lot of comments. It's not just one person. It's like hundreds of these comments
Yeah.
that come in. I can only imagine how much worse it is for somebody who is a
Yeah.
professional woman out there trying to, because you're like, well, I am a woman. Like,
Yeah, I am the thing that you're not supposed to be if you're a man, right? And it is really interesting to watch sort of this jockeying of power along the hierarchy of masculinity, and the way in which a lot of men will kind of step on other men and denigrate them as women, while also using a lot of women psychologically and otherwise in their lives to step
Mhm,
on them and elevate themselves higher in this hierarchy.
mhm,
Precarious masculinity behaviors are such that you have to constantly be proving your masculinity. And one of the ways that men are
mhm.
conditioned to do that unconsciously is by always asserting dominance. So that means they're
Right.
always trying to make someone below them and kicking the dog, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah, like 100%. Like,
Yeah.
as men, we don't really have a lot of great modes to be in the world. Like, and I think that
Mhm.
men often feel like there is this competition, there is this
Yeah.
one-upsmanship, and like either
Mhm.
it's like literally beating each other up, but usually it's like a professional one, or I'm smarter than you, or I'm like da 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 da. I have to prove something.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to be in conversation and listen to people, right? It's really hard to be
Mhm.
like, actually, instead of we're both losers, actually. We're both not all that great, and maybe we can try to learn something. That's definitely
Yeah.
not a uh, it's not that's not an easy space to inhabit, because when you feel,
It's
you don't
not.
want, a men doesn't want to feel inferior, right? I mean, I guess
Mhm.
no one wants to feel inferior.
Yeah, nobody really wants to feel inferior, but I do think men have a really hard go at it because they have been given these messages that like you have to be dominant all the time. And the thing is, when you are trying to always assert your dominance or always be in a position of power or always be the superior person, it's really hard to be connected. And that's by
Mm,
design, right? This is one of the ways that patriarchal thinking really robs men of their life potential and their humanity because
mhm,
they are so isolated in that experience, right?
mhm,
We can't be connected because then we have to like drop all of these walls and drop all of these
mhm,
protections that guard our superiority and our dominance. And that's really
mhm.
painful for a lot of men. And so I think that also begets a lot of the rage that comes flying out at people online who start to talk about things that really challenge that.
Yeah. And I think there's also this feeling, especially in the manosphere, right? If there's like a
Mhm.
pyramid of men in the world, like especially in the mainstream media, like the top man is Rogan, right? Right, and then there's these other guys who come down.
Okay.
I hate to say it, right? I really hate to say it, but he is the epitome of masculinity for a large number of men. He has created a model of like deep thinking, but also like um, open to new ideas, and also access to all the celebrities and all of the people, and like, and power, because he sort of makes or breaks people. Sort of, he is sort of at the top of that, and people also feel like they want to support everything he does because he is powerful. Like, it's the
Mm,
idea that because someone is powerful, you should let them do whatever they want, because as you started out saying, we have this group think idea, and we want to be part
mhm,
of a tribe. We want to
mhm.
feel like our group is going to protect us, so you have to protect the strong man at the
Right.
top. And it's really funny because it sort of shows you that you're not all alpha men. Right? You're not everyone could be an alpha man if you're following the alpha man at the top.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's so funny. I mean, even those studies about the whole alpha concept have been disproven by the person who originated the studies, right? He's
Mhm.
come out and said, guys, I got it all wrong. This is not actually a thing. Stop using the language this way.
Wolves
But
work different.
right, exactly. But it is something that a lot of men, I think, really cling to, this sort of idea
Mhm.
of if I support the guy on top, then I can be like the guy on top. Right. And
Mhm.
that's sort of this enmeshed identity that happens, right? When you don't have enough to really shore out your identity otherwise.
Absolutely. I think we're gonna dig into some of this a little bit more. But one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, we're gonna
Mhm.
switch gears just a little bit, is one of the things that's come out about Andrew Huberman. And I actually really don't think it's just Andrew Huberman. I think this is a sort of a, having had many more conversations, I think in that echelon of person, this is actually a type of personality that seems to
Mhm.
exist maybe among the other, a significant portion of the other top 100 podcasters who are male out there. And I'm not going to go into too many more details because you run into some legal issues there.
Right.
Um, how bad is infidelity? Let's just say, and we're going to start very basic here. How
Okay.
bad is infidelity? And is it ever okay to cheat on a romantic partner?
Love these questions. So I want to just like take a step back for a second and talk about infidelity here. How
Hmm.
bad is it? I think it depends on how much weight each person in the partnership places on the fidelity agreements that have been made. Now, most folks take fidelity agreements pretty seriously. You know, we sign up to be partnered with people under the understanding that, hey, we're doing this thing together and this thing looks like this, and here are the agreements that we've made. So when somebody breaks the agreements without talking to that partner about, hey, I need to make a change here in our agreements, it can feel like a huge betrayal. A huge betrayal. And
Mhm.
that can be profoundly traumatic to the person who has experienced that betrayal. If they've really invested a lot of trust and a lot of safety and a lot of their mental, physical, material, sexual, spiritual resources into that person and into that relationship. Now, there are other people who have really different perspectives on that, and they may not be so profoundly impacted by it. So I'm not going to say that there's only one way to react to infidelity, but I
Mhm.
would say that the majority of people who are betrayed experience a pretty significant amount of trauma. So I
Mhm.
would say that there are a bunch of other choices before infidelity is the thing that you should pursue.
Mhm.
Um, and we ought to look at the motivations for infidelity because they range, right? And I want to really say that we do need to humanize people who commit infidelity because there are many reasons that people do this. And certainly there are certain personality profiles and organizations where infidelity plays a bigger role and has a different meaning. But sometimes people engage in infidelity because they're trying to reconnect with a part of themselves and they don't know how to do that without hurting their partner. So I do think there are genuinely some folks who are trying to explore something while also protecting their relationship. That doesn't make it okay, right? Because primarily they're trying to protect themselves from the consequences of bringing that reality to their relationship. But I don't think everyone who commits infidelity is an evil villain,
Mhm.
trying to just wreak havoc on their world. But certainly for some folks who are betraying partners, that is a part of what it gives them charge, right? Getting away with wrecking something, getting away with having a secret, and it takes on a different ilk.
It's interesting to me because I think infidelity is one of those things that you can put out in a conversation. She
Mhm.
cheated on me. He cheated on me.
Mm.
As a, like, okay, here's that they did the worst thing
Yeah.
that could ever happen, and therefore they are a bad person, and then everything I did was right. It sort of creates this victim perpetrator dynamic that many people are like, well, they did it. That's the worst. But the way I think of it, I read a lot of Dan Savage. Like he's like,
Yeah.
I've subscribed since like the '90s. I've been reading
Mhm.
Dan Savage, and the way I've sort of come to think of it is like when you make ultimatums about something and you create one category of betrayal, which is worse than all other betrayals, you forget, or you sort of like obliviate everything that might have come before and after. Like if you were making agreements, if you were actually had sort of agreements, what infidelity would actually look like. Is it
Mhm.
emotional cheating? Is it texting? Is it,
Right.
is it full on sex? Is it like whatever, however, whatever combination of factors.
Mhm.
But you can actually get to a point where somebody, let's say you just haven't had sex for 10 years, let's say you haven't had any connection with your spouse, or like 100 other things that could have, they stole
Mhm.
your car, they threw out all your stuff, like whatever.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the infidelity. That could just be a step
It's a symptom.
in a relationship.
Mhm.
And when you make it the worst thing, that can be a problem. It can make it. Yes.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like it really depends on the context, right? And what has been going on in each relationship. I was just reading a thread the other day about a woman who found out that her husband had been having an affair and she was actually not bothered by it. She felt relieved because they'd lost their connection for a long, long time. It had been many years. And she didn't want to get divorced because they had three teenage children and she
Hmm.
didn't want to disrupt the easy logistics that they had come to establish in their life. So, what she decided to do instead was put a dating profile out in the world and do the same thing. She
Hmm.
felt like, okay, well, if he's doing that, then I'm going to do it too. And what ensued was her partner becoming furious with her because
Hmm.
he had an affair to sort of jolt her into reality, according to him. He wanted to get her jealous so that she would, provide more effort and attention to him. So it was a
Hmm.
really indirect way of trying to get his needs met in the partnership. I don't know whatever happened to that couple. But, affairs can be really painful, and they also can be productive, depending on how partners respond to them. And I don't mean productive in terms of the affair itself, but when there's a discovery, how they heal around it can be really
Hmm.
productive. Yeah, I think I had Dan Savage on my podcast a while ago, and he's very clear on being one of the few people out there who will give people a permission slip to cheat. He said, and
Hmm.
that evoked a big ruckus in my community because I do work with a lot of betrayed partners and a lot of people who are trying to heal from
Hmm.
infidelity. And I think there's some merit in what he's saying in some extreme cases, but I
Hmm.
would be really cautious about saying that flippantly because I think there are a
Yes.
lot of people who already weaponize loopholes in their partnership and don't want to do the deeper work of trying to repair a connection.
And I think that's where this, especially with the Huberman case, why this is such like an interesting cultural moment, right?
Mhm.
Insofar that he is a very famous, very powerful, top of the hierarchy sort of dude,
Mhm.
and the reaction from a lot of his defenders are, of course, powerful men cheat. It doesn't affect his science, right? Of course, like, haha, I am not surprised that this rich, powerful guy has this sort of this this set of relationships that in their own personal lives probably wouldn't fly, right? It probably wouldn't fly
It wouldn't fly.
in the average guy in Indiana living in a suburban town who really
Mhm.
respects Huberman, but now is suddenly like, well, we got to defend him. And one of my there's so many questions that sort of flow out of this for me. One of them is I think that there are a lot of powerful men who get to
Mhm.
these places who then decide, maybe because they have the power, that they have the permission to do it because they have the ability to do it,
Mhm.
and that they're sort of like kings or cult leaders.
Yeah.
And do they get do they get a pass? Do they have are they allowed, or when you're powerful, do you get a pass to do whatever you want?
I don't think so. I don't think we should be giving people passes to do whatever they want because power is a beautiful thing when it is explicitly discussed and understood and moderated and when it's not exploited. And what happens for a lot of very powerful people, and since the majority of the very powerful people in this world are men, I'm just going to talk about men for a second here, but
Sure.
certainly people of other genders can corrupt power as well. But for a lot of really powerful men, um, the exploitation of others is a part of how they came to be in power. And it's a part of what gets them off. It's a part of what's important in their intrapsychic organization to help themselves continue to feel powerful, right? Because very powerful men are often incredibly insecure, but
Mhm.
they have created an image that gives them self-reassurance. And I don't know if that's true for Huberman or any particular man that we're talking about or a person in power, but for a lot of people with this organization, the getting away with things is a part of how they
Mhm.
establish their superiority and it's how they establish their dominance. And so when we're looking at men in particular who are very powerful and who exhibit a lot of infidelity behavior or sexual deception behavior, it's a part of how they understand themselves. And it's a part of why his defenders, or why many defenders of powerful men, are coming out in droves because a lot of those men are jealous that they can't get away with it in their own lives because they
Mhm.
don't have that kind of power. And for a lot of men who adhere to these ideas of precarious masculinity, that's the ideal, right? Getting away with shit, being all powerful, being somebody who gets to get over on someone and have that kind of dominance, right? So it's incredibly psychological for a lot of folks and habitual in understanding how they've gotten to power. And it's, I think, really remiss to think that it is only a part of their sexual domain of life and and romantic relationships. I've worked with so many men who are like this, who show up and they've really kind of shit the bed in their lives, for lack of a better phrase. And they are recognizing the way that their relationship with power is actually causing their lives to fall apart. And when
Mhm.
they finally get past the defenses of it all, a lot of them are really open with how messy the other areas of their lives have become because they carry this same sort of exploitative or secretive or getting away with stuff behavior into the other domains of their lives. So it's not just a romantic or a sexual cleanup on aisle 5. It extends
Mhm.
to every other area of their lives for many people.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. This is the middle of the show break where I remind you to hit that like and subscribe button down below so you can keep on seeing these cool conversations I'm having with amazing people, and and also that I have this Patreon where my most devoted fans get early access to everything that I do early, and it really helps make all of this possible. Talking about these major media players with millions and millions of dollars and whole media industries behind their influencer status is, well, it's sort of scary sometimes. I mean, you'll probably notice that there's already internet hate in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. People don't like what I'm doing, but you might see the value in it. And so go check me out on Patreon and get my newsletter. That's free. It comes out every week. And without further ado, we're going back into the show. Another thing that which is often said is that when somebody's podcast is out there, someone's show, someone's professional life
Mhm.
exists in the public sphere. Um, I just care about their work, right? I just care about what their science is, what their acting career is like, and part of me is like, I sort of get that. Like, I don't
Mhm.
want to cancel every actor. I mean, one of the you're in the Bay Area, right?
No, I'm
Um,
in Los Angeles.
oh, even better. I like LA a lot more than the Bay Area. But there was this recent case, and
Mhm.
maybe it's blown out of proportion, but there was a school called Abraham Lincoln High School in the Bay Area, and they changed its name because Abraham Lincoln was a racist by modern standards, and like that seems to me ridiculous. I think most people are like, come on, like we have to be rational here. You judge him by the standards of that time. Uh,
Mhm.
and it can totally go in that direction. I still will watch a Kevin Spacey movie, even though he's got issues. Um, but on the other side, like, can you really separate? Like, where is that crossover between whatever you is in your
Mhm.
personality type and what your public presentation is? And is there a danger for the people who are receiving it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't know that there is a right answer because I think that a lot of how we address the question of cancel culture is dependent on our own personal understandings about morality and our own value system. But I think it is important that one, we recognize that people in power are often targeted, right? Because as much as people want to support them, some people want to support them, some people want to take them down. And
Hmm.
so I do think that people who have a very public facing career and persona um, have to endure a lot of tension as they weather the fighting and the push and pull of those two groups likely. But I do think that it's risky to cancel people. I'm not really a fan of
Hmm.
cancel culture.
Sure.
However, we have yet to really come up with a kind of collective agreement on what the channel for restorative justice might look like and accountability might look like. And so here's where I think we're in a dangerous chasm because without a real path for accountability and reform and for people to take steps to try to make whole any victims that have been victimized in the path of their behavior, and also to change their behavior. What are we left with? We're left with people who get away with a lot of really
Right.
exploitive, abusive things
Hmm.
and who go on to have illustrious careers, make lots and lots of money, and continue to exploit people along the way. Or they get canceled and they're and their humanity sort of abolished, because they are just humans, just like the rest of us. I don't care how smart someone is or how imperfect they are, the most egregious things they've done. They're human beings too, right? So we can't just throw people away when they have exhibited poor behavior, even if it's a pattern of poor behavior. Um, but I think that's, the simplistic way that we think about folks and problems in the world. Like, okay, you're either good or you're bad. You're either
Mhm.
worthy or we're going to throw you away. And that bifurcated approach to justice just really doesn't work. And I
Mhm.
don't think that there is a concrete solution yet that bridges the polarization.
Yeah, it feels like you can't have a real conversation about complexities because, again, we
Hmm.
have this groupthink. You fall on to, I mean, the left or the right, or the
Hmm.
feminists or the other side. Like everyone sort of like has their different groups that you almost. And I feel the pressure in this too. I'm sure
Hmm.
many of my listeners too, and I assume you do as well. Is like you start saying something, and then you feel like you have to sort of like find your teammates on
Yeah.
that conversation, even if something's controversial and you're like, well, it doesn't totally fit. Like we
Hmm.
work in teams, and then we're also looking for social cues for like, did I say the wrong thing?
Right.
Really hard to be a human on the internet now. We have too many relationships we're trying to manage, and I don't know how to do
Mhm.
it. Um, one thing that I was having this conversation with my wife last night,
Mhm.
where we were trying to be like, well, is it these sort of, I guess, I'm not I can't diagnose people, but narcissistic, sociopathic, whatever, dark triad stuff, like, do those personality traits make you famous? Like, is that, do you need those traits in order to beat the competition and get to the point where you become the top dog in whatever thing? Because there's a book that I read about, like it's something like 40% of CEOs could be diagnosed with psychopathy.
Yeah.
And like, so how important are those traits to success, and what does that mean about our world?
I mean, I love this question. Yeah. So, a little bit of background first. I'm a forensic psychologist and as well as a clinical psychologist, and I spent a good chunk of my time working in prisons with folks who had done
Oh,
the
wow.
most egregious things, sexually violent persons and non-sexually violent persons. So, for many years, I had a tremendous amount of experience doing evaluations for psychopathy and helping the forensic process along and determining sort of what their sentencing or reintegration into the community might look like. Um, and in a lot of that study and in a lot of that work, yeah, there's a tremendous amount of research out there on what are called white collar psychopaths, because there are a lot of benefits to being exploitative if you are trying to be all powerful. And some psychopaths use those skills to progress companies forward and amass a tremendous amount of wealth, or develop other kinds of practices in the world that do help them elevate themselves to the top. And they often take with them other people who are organized in a similar way, right? Because the only people they can trust are other people they can't trust, but who are explicit about that, right?
Oh, explain that to me.
Yeah.
That sounded brilliant, and I'm like, but I'm trying to parse it out.
Well, a lot of psychopaths work alone, but when they work with other people collaboratively, it's with other people who are organized to exploit people similarly, right? Which is why when you see these sort of like gangs of folks in power at the top doing bad things, they often have similar psychological profiles. Now, they are all for themselves at the end of the day, but they will work together in clusters to kind of join their powers, if you will, for some sort of shared goal, but they can't fully trust each other, right?
Mhm.
They really can't fully trust each other. You see this a lot when we look at like the history of mafia groups, and like the mob bosses kind of respected each other, and they would meet periodically to call a moratorium on some fighting and whatever, but they never fully trusted each other, and there's good reason for that, right? Because at the end of the
Mhm.
day, they were all for themselves. So yes, white collar psychopathy is a thing, and people who are at the top can show a higher degree of these kinds of personality organizations. And it is part of what makes them successful because they're okay stepping on people to get to the top.
What is the thing that a psychopath sees in another psychopath that makes them want to trust that person?
I mean, the fact that trust is a tricky word there.
Okay.
I might say I think we can use the word trust if we use it loosely because they don't fully trust them, but they
Hmm.
understand that they work similarly. They understand
Hmm.
that that guy's got power over that, or that person has something I can use and I have something they can use. So they sort of like barter their psychopathic assets, if you will, and they see them in that other person, and so they can sometimes work collaboratively, on a joint mission. But again, I don't think they really trust each other. They're not
Yeah.
buddies. They're still going to be suspicious of one another. But, water rises to meet its level. So when they see that they're at that same degree of functioning, there's
Yeah.
something familiar about that.
It's really interesting. So I've been doing. I have this other video that it's coming out on Monday, which will actually probably be after. It'll be out by the time anyone listens to this, and
Hmm.
it's about the philosophy of the the comedy improv philosophy of yes and it's the
Yeah.
idea that you get on stage and like whatever someone says, you don't
Hmm.
say no, but like you say something and then you just agree with it and then you add to it,
Hmm.
and to me this seems like one of the things that's this cult of like relentless positivity in the world. Like you just affirm everything someone else says, and that's actually a way to get famous. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, you believe in lizard people, but let me tell you about vaccines. Like and let me tell you about vaccines. It's like you sort of like add things
Hmm.
instead of ever, you know, saying, wait,
Yeah.
let's talk about do your facts actually make sense? Is there a record we can go to? It feels to me like the like a lot of the world is this improv routine, and that improv routine is unfortunately one of the keys to success. So if a psychopath sees another psychopath and they agree that they're on some sort of journey parallel, hopefully,
Hmm.
if they affirm what that psychopath does and the other psychopath affirms them, you're sort of like getting your teams together and you're saying, yeah, let's work together.
Hmm.
um, that's my take on this.
I mean, certainly that can happen. That can happen. And I think one of the things that is important to just highlight here is that we are living in a culture where education is being threatened all over the place. And so I
Mhm.
think that folks are hungry for knowledge while also being served an undernourishing source of education in our country.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
people don't necessarily have the media literacy skills to critique what
Hmm.
they're seeing on TV. So they often ascribe authority to people who sound very confident. Or who have a lot of perceived power. So, there's a big sort of authority bias and credibility bias that comes with that exploitation, and this is why people who do have very powerful platforms, in many folks' opinions, have a higher responsibility to use the platforms responsibly. Because if you understand the dynamics of power and you take seriously the protection of the people who follow you, then you do your best to really challenge the information that you're putting out there so that people can make informed decisions. But a lot of folks who get to those top places of power either are undereducated themselves, which is definitely the case for a lot of folks who have big platforms. So they don't necessarily have those skills, again, to critique the experts who come on their channels. They become enamored by the power or their way of speaking about something. So that's tough, right? But there
But they
are
can
people.
also be experts, right? They can also
Exactly.
be Lex Friedman or Andrew Huberman
Mhm.
or these people with actual PhDs.
Yeah,
Uh,
but people with PhDs.
Sorry, that was my that's a scam call. Go on.
I love your ringtone for that. Um, People with PhDs are humans too. And the thing about PhDs is that they don't protect you from your biases, right? And a lot of folks do not continuously explore their biases. They get very comfortable in their post. And mm, some professions have more rigorous standards around the ongoing exploration of biases and challenging that and doing that deeper work, and some professions don't. So, you know, it's not a protection against bias, and a lot of experts, their biases are loud.
And also, if you're an expert in something, like
Mhm.
you're a clinical psychologist and you're very smart, I assume. I mean, you seem very smart to me. But if you, but I would never ask you about metamorphic rock and geology and its effect on volcanism. Like
Never.
you would be like, I got nothing to say on
Yeah,
that. uh,
exactly.
or the ethics in journalism, or like
Mhm.
any number of things that you are not an expert in. And I think when people have very broad platforms,
Mhm.
you default to affirmation of whatever your expert is. And when you have a bunch of people who where these traits,
Mhm.
whatever these narcissistic psychopathic traits, and which I think we need to define those very soon. Um, then the likelihood that you're just affirming someone else's perhaps entirely crazy take, and you don't have the expertise to effectively, or even desire to effectively push back,
Mhm.
you can get into this cycle of misinformation and toxic affirmation.
Mhm.
And rather than that was just me commenting, I actually want to go back to what I actually wanted you to answer. Can we define what narcissism or psychopathy or this dark triad thing? What is that stuff?
Yeah. Well, the only one of those conditions that's actually in the DSM is narcissistic personality disorder. And I mean, I'm not going to list off all the criterion. People can certainly Google that online, but I think some of the most commonly understood traits are things like being very charming, having a grandiose sense of self, being exploitative of others, lacking empathy for other people's pain, particularly when you've been the one exploiting them. Um, Sometimes it can involve being glib and superficial, like being really focused on people being jealous of you or being jealous of other people. So those are some of the most commonly understood characteristics, and it's also only one of the depictions of narcissism. That's sort of
Mhm.
like the grandiose narcissist. But there are other flavors of narcissism. One in particular is a malignant narcissist. And that is all of the things that I just mentioned, but even more intentionally exploitative. And they can also be incredibly abusive,
Mm.
even more manipulative than a grandiose narcissist. And in really sort of like overt ways. Like they're hard to be around. They're kind of just a jerk all the time. They're combative, they're
Mm.
critical, um, and very controlling. And then there's a covert or a vulnerable narcissist. And that person is very egocentric. They can also be manipulative. But where they are in contrast with the other two is that a grandiose or malignant narcissist thinks they're the shit, right?
Mm.
A covert or a vulnerable narcissist thinks they're the biggest piece of shit that the entire world revolves around.
Mm.
And I can't take credit for that phrase, but it's such a perfect phrase to sort of illustrate the egocentrism, but also the contrast in how that can show up. Um, so from there, sociopathy and psychopathy are not terms that are in the DSM, but they're sort of thought of as like extensions of antisocial personality disorder. And they do house some of the same traits. They can be charming, they can be superficially glib, but they also can be very exploitative. Somebody who's antisocial also has very little to no empathy for other people.
Mhm.
They may have a lot of problematic behavior in the world. So, doing things that are against the law or exploiting or abusing other people. And sort of as they get into degrees of acuity, we tend to then look at, from an antisocial personality disorder, what people sort of colloquially call sociopathy or psychopathy. And sociopaths are people who tend to be more reactive and impulsive and less intentional, but probably more problematic in their behavior and more intensely acute in some of their exploitative behaviors. Psychopaths, however, typically are less impulsive and more intentional,
Mm.
and they are far more exploitative and a little bit more difficult to suss out because they can be not always, but they can be more charming. They have adapted masks to get through the world with less detection of their real personality, and when they drop the mask, it's pretty terrifying. But they also can be very parasitic, and they can be far more subtle in how they exploit people, but they're often incredibly entitled. So are narcissists and
Mhm.
sociopaths. But entitlement in that thread is a pretty big one, and I think probably hones in on a lot of what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, having met people who I believe are psychopaths, it
Mhm.
is the charmingness is evident. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
there's something about them which is just so, they listen. You feel like they listen,
You feel like
and you
it.
feel like you're. I mean, I think they do listen, but what are they listening for? Is the question. Like, what is?
Opportunities.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but they're
No, no,
listening.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. But they're listening for something,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden it gets like this mass drops, and there's this other side of the personality. Like
Mhm.
there's rage, there's anger, there's manipulation, there's meanness, there's outrageous
Mhm.
accusations. And you're like, oh my god, this is like, it's like I'm dealing with a whole nother person here.
Yeah.
And y- and obviously I'd written, or I've talked a little bit about my experience with Huberman, but it's actually not just him. I think I know three of these people in my life.
Mm.
Luckily, only three. And at first, there's always this feeling of almost of just like, this is an intensely wonderful connection,
Mhm.
and it makes me wonder. Like a lot of people are suggesting that, well, why would you even stay with this person? Like, why would you want to hang out with this person again? They've betrayed you. Like for
Mm.
these women, they were cheated on, or I was, like, yelled at, and like they did something bad to me. Like, but what is it about that personality type that also makes you, oh no, but I'm going to give this person another chance?
Such a good question. There are many reasons that people would give someone like that another chance. One, they're often manipulated into doing so with promises of it's never going to happen again. I've changed. Can't you see? I love you so much, and I didn't mean to hurt you, and all the things that they want to hear because they really want to believe that that person loves them the way they've believed they've been loved. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're willing to extend a lot of benefit of the doubt to someone who they really want to trust and they really want to be connected with, and to believe that their connection has been real. I think a lot of folks stay in those dynamics because the reality of how they've been manipulated is almost too much to bear. I mean, it is one of the key symptoms of betrayal trauma is just experiencing your reality having been shattered, and that is
Mm-hmm.
super painful and can cause a whole bunch of trauma, and especially a lot of existential trauma, a lot of existential dread. If I could have been in this relationship and felt so trusting with this person and believed they were who they said they were, can I even trust my own judgment about myself, other people, or the world? So
Mm-hmm.
it brings up a sense of terror, I think, for a lot of folks. And that's really hard to contend with. So the psychological answer to that, or the defense mechanism to that, is I don't want to believe that to be true. So I'm going to believe these promises that are being told to me now. That's one reason. Another reason people stay with someone like that is because they've been conditioned to believe that they're not worthy of better treatment
Mm-hmm.
through experiences with peer groups, with families of origin, and many generations of intergenerational. That was very redundant. Generations of trauma passed down over and over again that have created for them an expectation that they have to just contend with this kind of behavior. When we're looking at heterosexual relationships where the male partner is the person who is being sexually deceptive or engaging in infidelity behavior, a lot of women have been conditioned to believe that that's just something men do. A lot of men have been
Mm-hmm.
conditioned to believe that nonsense as well. So a lot of folks will give the benefit of the doubt and they'll give exceptions and lots of runway to just sort of tolerate that because they've been told that they should be loyal no matter what, and
Mm-hmm.
that they can't demand better treatment because men aren't capable of it, or even if they're capable of it, they should get to do what they want. So, there's just a lot of gender role conditioning around power dynamics that
Yeah.
unconsciously people believe. And when you couple that with a lot of folks' determination to make a marriage work for all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
reasons, a lot of folks are willing to stay in relationship to give it a go, and they're willing to tolerate a lot of agony in service of that. And I'm saying willing, and I don't want to be victim blaming here. When I say willing, it's an unconscious process. They don't like it. It doesn't feel good. They want it to stop. They want
Hmm.
to believe that their partner is going to treat them well at some point, and
Right.
they're working through understanding if that's possible.
It's interesting you bring up the idea of loyalty, because I think that gets weaponized quite a bit.
It
Is that,
does.
you are loyal to me and therefore I can do anything, because it's sort of like one of the problems with even the marriage vow is like, oh well,
Mhm.
I've said I married you, therefore I guess we just have to stick with this no matter what, which can be a very toxic feeling.
Mhm.
I actually think divorce helped the world a lot, because then you're like, actually, no, I have to work on this, or else,
Mhm.
I have to be held accountable.
Mhm.
Um, but with this, I one of the things that also happened that you had brought up is this feeling of worthlessness in somebody. Is that are you going to be deserving of this? And one of the things that I've heard from the women who have dated Andrew Huberman repeatedly, is that there is this sort of subservience that was expected, uh,
Mhm.
in the relationship, and how it manifested. And I'm not going to give the names of the people who were involved with this, but this was told to me. So you can think of this as hearsay. That's fine. This might be
Okay.
hearsay. Um, but it comes from a source who definitely did date Andrew Huberman for a long time. He would expect them, when they come to the door of the house, that they would take off his shoes and kiss his feet. That was part of the ritual. And there was like a like making food for him and kneeling while he eats a steak, wearing a dog collar while they do it. And it was, that could sound like some sort of kinky BDSM stuff, right?
Sure.
And
Mhm.
we could think about that however we want to, but the way this person related to me was also about putting her in his place. Like, he enjoyed the fact that he could put her down, and
Mhm.
by making her feel worthless, it allowed him this leeway to do basically anything. And these
Mhm.
patterns were, I guess, not BDSM, but they were sort of like weaponized BDSM in a way.
Mhm. Well, I can't speak to Huberman's behavior in particular because I don't know him. I've never
Sure.
evaluated him, but in a context like that, it's not BDSM if it's not transparent, right?
Hmm.
And so if someone is engaging in behavior where the other partner is not fully informed and cannot therefore consent, we're not talking about healthy kink. We're talking about abuse and exploitation. So, whether or not they consented to the kinky behavior, I think, is a different story, right? Kink is
Hmm.
kink. BDSM is fine. It can be healthy and constructive for two people who are informed and
Hmm.
are consenting based on transparency and mutuality.
Hmm.
But when transparency and mutuality are not discussed, then there's a tremendous amount of risk that's not being disclosed. And that is definitely exploitation and an
Hmm.
abuse of power. So I could imagine that someone who's organized with a preference for needing to feel superior and dominant may hold back information about the sort of full scope of their sexuality and the full scope of their behavior in the world so as to maintain this power imbalance, right? Because
Hmm.
what it says to me is that someone who may engage in that kind of exploitation feels tremendously insecure because if they were playing on an even playing field of full transparency, there's a fear that they may not actually get their needs met, right?
Hmm.
And so that fear, we could sort of think about it as an abandonment fear. I might be rejected or abandoned, or I may not get my needs met. Therefore, I may not be worthy. I may not be good enough. And so, holding back this information is a way to disregard other people's agency and autonomy. And it's really about self protection in those instances. So yeah, I can see a world where someone organized in that way would try to subject someone to
Hmm.
subjugating behavior because there's something important to them about needing to maintain a power imbalance all the time to feel okay in their own skin.
So another thing that comes up repeatedly,
Mhm.
Huberman, for instance, is a advocate of therapy. You know, and many of these people are actually, I think a lot of
Mhm.
them at the top layer, I think a lot of them, Esther Perel is their actual therapist at that sort of top layer. And there's this idea that they're working on themselves, they're introspective, and that they are trying to become better. And probably there's even an honest feeling that they're trying to become better in that person. What I also hear is that the tools that are given in a therapeutic session get weaponized against the person that they're in a relationship with. Like
Mhm.
there's therapy language that is deployed that actually becomes, I mean, almost toxic, becomes like a tool that can be used against someone. So, I mean, how do we think about can a person have too much therapy? Like, how does a therapist deal with this dynamic, which can certainly emerge?
Yeah, it's a great question, and again, I can't speak to Huberman in particular, but definitely therapists see this all the time. They see couples come in, and one partner is super motivated authentically, and the other partner is super motivated to find better ways to get away with things. So the therapy that happens does get weaponized against a partner, and often in very subtle ways, right? It's often weaponized in ways like the abusive or exploitative partner saying things like, well, I'm just sharing my feelings with you.
Hmm.
Or using sort of a false listening and then weaponizing what's shared later, right, to sort of leverage some power. And the thing is, not everyone is appropriate for couples therapy. There are some partners who will take advantage of the situation and sort of hide in therapy so that they can
Right.
like perform this image of, look at me, I'm the good partner, I'm going to therapy, I'm doing the work, I'm
Hmm.
invested in growth. And that gives them a lot of allowances to continue acting poorly and exhibiting the same behavior with their partner, because they can say things like, look, I'm working on it, or I have this diagnosis and therefore I can't be held accountable.
Hmm.
Or we're going to have to talk about that in therapy because um, I don't trust you or I don't feel safe. Now, that can be a valid claim and a valid boundary to make with partners, but it is often weaponized when someone doesn't actually want to be accountable for what their partner is bringing to them. And folks who are psychopathic typically are not indicated for therapy because they will go to
Mm.
therapy and learn how to become better psychopaths. So,
Of
you know,
course they will.
right. They're looking for an opportunity, and therapy gives them a lot more tools to be better at getting what they want.
So a certain percentage of the people who listen to this are going to be in relationships with psychopaths. If psychopaths are a part of society, a percentage of the fabric, there's going to be people who are listening to this who are maybe in a relationship with a partner or just a friend or an acquaintance. What are the signs that someone can look at and know that they're in a toxic relationship that cannot be
Mm.
salvaged?
Oh, well, I can't say that carte blanche for everyone because everyone has their own subjective boundaries and limits for what they can tolerate.
Hmm.
But I would say maybe a good rule of thumb is if you feel chronically dismissed, if you feel chronically abused, if you feel chronically neglected, and you've worked really hard to put in efforts to get your partner to collaborate with you differently, and either they're not reciprocating that effort, either they can't or they won't. Um, or they're using it to further exploit or abuse you. I think you have to decide what you're willing to tolerate and what your thresholds are. But no one deserves to be treated that way. No one deserves to be in a partnership that is not mutual, reciprocal, and equitable. That means different things to different people. So I think it's up to partners to define that in a way that works for them. But if you and your partner cannot even agree on that, well, it might be an important time to reevaluate if this is a partnership that you can see yourself really growing in and feeling safe in for the long term. someone's crossing your boundaries repeatedly, things like that.
Well, I really appreciate having this talk with you. I feel like we could talk for quite a bit longer. But so if someone does want to listen to you more, where do they find you?
Oh,
And where there's going to be links down there in the whole bio stuff. So
yeah. Thank you for inviting me onto your show. It's been a really fun conversation, and I'm glad that you are talking about these things and helping people get educated about how they can approach relationships differently and maybe think a little bit more um, dimensionally about their heroes, perhaps.
yeah.
Um, but if folks want to work with me or if they want to follow any of the work that I do, my website, modernintimacy.com, is probably the best place to start. And on social media, I'm at Dr. Kate Balestreri on TikTok and on Instagram. On YouTube, I'm at Modern Intimacy, and you can listen to my podcast, Get Naked with Dr. Kate.
And I think you're also on Threads, right? Because I think that's where I met you, and that's
Yeah.
where all of the action is these days. I've decided. I think
Yes.
that's where it's happening.
I always forget about Threads, but it is probably my favorite platform right now.
Yeah, I don't know why. I
Yeah.
don't know why that happened. Anyway, thank
Yeah.
you for being here, and for everyone who's watching. This was Scott Carney Investigates, and there is so much more out there, and maybe we'll come back on and have Kate on the show again. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you.